My mom sneered. 3 daughters made her proud, but the 4th daughter, me, made her wonder if I was even worth her effort. Growing up in a house full of females, I was always mocked as the failure until they discovered their careers ran through a tower I secretly owned. Hey Reddit, I, Lisa, 31, female, grew up in a family where I was always treated like the odd one out. My mom worshipped my sisters and acted like I was just extra. For years, I kept my head down, worked my ass off, and stayed quiet while they mocked me. But eventually, things reached a point where staying quiet wasn't an option anymore. If you ever grew up in a house where it felt like you were just taking up space, you'll probably get where I'm coming from. My story isn't about some sad violin stuff, though. I'm not the woe is me type. I learned early on that no one's going to hand you respect. You either earn it or you stop caring about it. For me, that lesson started at home. See, my dad checked out of the picture when I was barely old enough to remember what brand of cereal he liked. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't. I used to think it wrecked all of us, but honestly, my mom seemed to turn it into fuel. She raised 4 kids, 3 girls and me, and decided she was going to prove to the world she could do it all without a man. And she did. If you measure life by how much you can brag at family reunions, she poured every ounce of her time, money, and pride into my sisters. Sophia, the oldest straight-A kid who wanted to be a doctor. Isabel, the money brain who set her sights on banking. And Erica, the sharp tongue who wanted law. Mom acted like she was building the Avengers but with college degrees. And me, I was the afterthought, the reminder of the man who bailed on her. She didn't even try to hide it. She'd say stuff like, "Girls need the push, the rest figure it out," which was her way of justifying why every spare dollar and ounce of attention went straight to my sisters. I'll never forget the day I found out the 529 college fund my grandparents set aside for me was gone. Mom was the custodian on the account, which meant she had the power to reassign the money. And she did. Shifted it straight over to my sisters like it was Monopoly cash. I was 17, looking at schools, and my mom sat me down like she was doing me a favor. She goes, "Your sisters' careers will bring stability. You'll figure something out. You're resourceful like your father." Translation: We spent your money because you don't matter. I didn't blow up, but inside I was boiling. I asked her straight, "So let me get this right. I'm supposed to go beg for loans while they write on my fund?" She just shrugged and said, "That's life. Women build their own way." The smugness in her tone was insane. So, yeah. While Sophia had her med school deposit covered, Isabel had her tuition handled, and Erica had mom paying for LSAT prep, I had nothing, just a cheap backpack, a pair of steel toe boots, and a head full of ideas no one respected. Now, here's the part where most people would fold and do what mommy wanted so they could stay in the will or whatever. That's not me. When it came time to pick a major, I didn't choose medicine, law, or finance like her dream daughters. I picked civil engineering and construction management. Mom acted like I just told her I wanted to join the circus. Her face went cold and she said, "You want to dig ditches for a living? You had potential and you're throwing it away." I shot back with a smirk. "Yeah, someone's got to design the towers your daughters are going to work in." She didn't even blink. She just said, "That's not respectable. You'll embarrass us." Embarrass her. That's what it always came down to. My mom was obsessed with appearances. If her daughters were polished professionals, she looked like a hero. If her other daughter worked construction, she looked like she'd failed. Never mind the fact that she wasn't lifting a finger to actually help me. My sisters weren't any better. They acted like parrots for her opinions. Sophia told me, "You'll regret it. Hospitals don't run without doctors." Isabel smirked. "You'll be managing paycheck to paycheck." I laughed. Not the nervous laugh you do when you're cornered, but the one you let out when you know you're going to remember this moment years later. "All right," I said. "You all bet against me. Just don't be surprised when I stop playing by your rules." That night, I sat in my room and thought about what I actually wanted out of life, not the fake version my mom kept pushing, where my worth was measured by how much I boosted her ego. I wanted to build something that outlasted her gossip and her bragging rights, something with my name on it, not hers. It was the first time I realized being the wrong daughter might actually be an advantage. My sisters had her handholding, her money, her network. They also had her leash. Every step they took was basically scripted by her. Me? I had nothing, which meant I could do whatever the hell I wanted. Of course, back then, it didn't feel empowering. It felt like being shoved into a cage match without gloves. But I wasn't scared. I was pissed, motivated, and maybe a little amused at how little faith they had in me. They thought they were cutting me off. In reality, they were cutting themselves off from ever being part of what I was about to build. By the time I turned 18, I had already made my choice. No begging for help, no compromise. If Mom wanted to pretend she had 3 daughters and no fourth, fine. I'd show her how costly that decision would be. I remember looking at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror of that old house and saying, "All right then, no one's coming to save you. You either prove them wrong or you disappear." And I grinned. Because honestly, the idea of proving them wrong sounded way more fun. College didn't start for a few months. So, while my sisters were bragging about their summer internships and Mom was parading them around like trophies, I went straight to work. Literally, my first real job was hauling drywall for a contractor who barely remembered my name half the time. It was $12 an hour, and I came home with cuts on my hands and dust in my lungs. By the end of the first week, I looked like I'd been fighting a war with concrete. That's when the princess comments started. I'd walk in through the back door, boots caked in mud, shirt damp with sweat. Mom would wrinkle her nose like I'd just tracked manure across her throne room. Sophia would smirk from the kitchen table, flipping through her medical notes, and say, "You seriously can't come in smelling like that." I'd throw my tool belt on the floor, wipe my face with a rag, and smile. Relax, dirt washes off. Entitlement doesn't. And that usually shut them up for 5 seconds before Mom swooped in with her classic line, "You're lowering the tone of this house. If your father was here, he'd never allow this." Funny thing is, Dad wasn't there. Hadn't been for years. But somehow I was the one blamed for reminding her of him. Every time I brought home a work uniform, a busted boot, or the smell of sweat, it was like she saw him walking through the door instead of me. The irony, I didn't mind the grind. Every bruise was proof I was pushing forward. Meanwhile, the perfect kids were sipping matches while Mom polished their resumes. When college finally kicked off, I had to juggle classes during the day and jobs at night. Picture this. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., hit a warehouse shift until noon, speed walk to campus with dust still clinging to my hair, sit through lectures smelling like rebar, then pull a delivery gig until midnight. My roommates hated it. Professors probably thought I was allergic to showers, but I didn't care. The silent treatment was worse, though. Dinner plates separated, conversations where I was invisible, sisters talking about their internships, and professors while I sat there chewing in quiet. It was like being a ghost at my own table, but ghosts don't sweat. And I was out there breaking my back every day. That was the difference. After a few months of this routine, I stuck with the degree, grinding it out at night classes and summer terms while working full-time. No ceremonies, no honor cords, just a diploma that smelled like coffee and rebar. I realized staying in that house was draining more energy than the jobs themselves. I'd drag myself home at 11 p.m., collapse on the couch, and wake up to Mom scolding me for ruining the cushions with work grime. One night she said, "You need to respect this house. We live clean here." I laughed in her face and said, "No, you live comfortable. I live real." That's when I packed my stuff. Not much to carry. Some clothes, a dented laptop, a secondhand toolbox. I didn't even announce it. Just walked out one morning and didn't come back. The first night away was in a tiny rented room above a garage. The window leaked when it rained. The bed creaked if I breathed too heavy, and the heat barely worked. But man, it felt like freedom. No one wrinkling their nose at me. No one comparing me to their fantasy daughter that never existed. Just me, my busted boots, and a promise I wasn't going back. That year was brutal, no lie. I missed out on parties, study groups, the kind of social life my sisters lived off of. But every paycheck and every credit I earned felt like one step closer to independence. The smell of sweat and dust didn't bother me anymore. It started to smell like progress. The best part, they expected me to crawl back, begging for help. Instead, I walked in with calloused hands, grease on my jeans, and a grin like I had a secret. Because I did. I knew something they didn't. Their flowery house wasn't built for me. I was building something bigger, something real, something they'd never be able to ignore. Fast forward a couple years. I'd survived the worst of the grind. Warehouse shifts, late-night deliveries, pouring sweat on construction sites while juggling lectures. I wasn't rich, not even close, but I'd saved up a little cushion and started sketching out what I wanted for my own business. Then Christmas rolled around. Mom invited me, though let's be real, it wasn't because she missed me. It was because every holiday was her stage. She needed all her kids lined up so she could show the relatives how perfect her family looked. When I walked into that house, it felt like stepping into a showroom. Candles lit, flowers on every table. Mom beamed like she was hosting a royal banquet. And then there was me. Boots scuffed, hands rough, shirt smelling faintly of drywall dust. No matter how many times I washed it, I could already see the whispers starting. Aunt here, uncle there, exchanging looks like, oh, here comes the dirty one. Dinner was the usual circus. Sophia went on about a research paper she was co-authoring at the hospital. Isabel bragged about some bank promotion. Erica flexed about her first cases at her firm. Mom ate it up, nodding proudly, repeating each detail like a hype woman. Then she'd glance at me like I was a stain on the tablecloth. Finally, a cousin leaned over and asked me what I'd been working on. For once, someone gave me the floor. I figured, fine, let me lay it out. I started explaining how I'd been saving, how I wanted to launch a construction company. Nothing massive at first, just office spaces, clinics, maybe expanding into commercial projects later. I talked about my plan, how I'd mapped out budgets, even lined up potential subcontractors. I barely got through a sentence before Mom cut me off with her trademark scoff. A construction company? Lisa, don't make it sound fancy. You're talking about handyman work. Don't mislead people. The table chuckled. My sisters joined in like trained backup singers. Sophia shook her head. You're not cut out for running a company. You don't even look professional half the time. Isabel smirked. If it was that good of an idea, investors would already be knocking. And Erica, never one to hold back, leaned forward and said, legally speaking, liability alone will bury you. You don't have the brains or the backing to survive that. Laughter spread around the table. A few relatives even nodded along like this was the evening's entertainment. Everyone takes a jab at Lisa. I sat there calm, chewing slowly, letting their words hang. On the inside, I was memorizing every line, every smug expression. This wasn't the first time they tried to humiliate me, but this was the most public. When the laughter died down, I smiled. Not the nervous kind, more like the you'll regret this one day kind. I leaned back and said, yeah, you're right. Doctors, bankers, lawyers, so much more respectable. I guess someone's got to pour your lattes and fix your office leaks while you're out saving the world. That shut a few people up. Mom, of course, snapped back. Don't be sarcastic. Respectable families don't joke about being failures. Failures. That word stuck. I didn't argue, though. I didn't raise my voice or slam my fork down like some drama scene. I just kept my grin and looked around the table, one face at a time, thinking, you really don't see it, do you? They saw me as the dirty outsider dragging filth into their flowery house. What they didn't see was the vision in my head, the towers, the offices, the contracts I was going to chase. They thought I was just building with bricks and concrete. What I was actually building was proof they'd eat later, bite by bite. After dinner, a few relatives patted my shoulder with pity, the kind of pats people give when they think you're about to end up living in a basement forever. One uncle even whispered, stick to steady work, kid. Don't get ideas too big for your boots. I just nodded, pocketed the advice, and walked out of that house with the cold December air hitting my face like a reset button. On the way back to my tiny rented room, I laughed to myself, not because it was funny, but because it was fuel. I realized something important that night. I was done pitching my dreams to them. I didn't need their approval, their money, or their pity. Talking to them was like arguing with a wall. They weren't listening. So fine, let them laugh. I'd let the results do the talking. That dinner was the last time I ever tried to sell myself to my family. After that, I kept my plans quiet. I saved. I worked. I built in silence because I knew one day the same people laughing at me would be sitting in offices I designed, paying rent for space in buildings with my name on the contracts. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to say a single word. But before that day came, I had to eat dirt. Not metaphorically, like actual dust, concrete powder, and whatever else blows in your face when you're hauling cinder blocks for 12 hours straight. Starting a construction business sounded cool in my head, but in reality, it was brutal. I put every cent I had into getting licensed, picking up secondhand equipment, and renting a storage unit that doubled as my office. It was laughable compared to my sister's polished careers. The first few jobs were scraps, fixing drywall in a strip mall, patching up a leaky roof for a local bakery, painting offices after hours because no one wanted to pay for daytime work. The money barely covered gas. Half the time, clients stalled on payments, and I'd end up eating instant noodles, waiting for a check that got lost in the mail. One night, I slept in my truck outside a job site because I didn't have gas money to drive back across town. Woke up stiff, shirt stuck to my neck from sweat, and laughed to myself. This was the glamorous, ditch-digging life Mom loved to mock. But here's the thing. Every busted knuckle, every unpaid invoice was mine. I wasn't leeching off anyone. I wasn't a trophy kid being polished for display. I was the one actually grinding. Of course, word trickled back to the family. Mom made sure to drag my failure stories into every conversation. At a cousin's wedding, I caught her telling an aunt, "Lisa says she's running a company, but it's just handyman jobs. She doesn't even wear a suit. Honestly, I don't know why she insists on embarrassing us." I didn't let it slide. I walked right up while she was mid-sentence, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said, "Embarrassing? Yeah. Nothing screams pride like living off your kid's college fund while telling her she's useless. Don't worry, Mom. When I build a skyscraper, I'll be sure to name the broom closet after you." Her face tightened like I'd slapped her. Relatives went dead quiet, pretending they didn't hear. I just smiled and walked away. That was the first time I realized sarcasm wasn't just defense. It was a weapon. Then came the bank situation. I needed a small loan to keep my company afloat. Nothing crazy. I knew Isabel worked as a branch manager, so I thought maybe, just maybe, family could show a shred of decency. I sat in her office, laid out my numbers, my plan, collateral, everything. She skimmed the papers with that smug banker look and said, "Lisa, you don't have the credentials. Banks don't take risks on people like you. You should try saving instead of pretending to be a business owner." I leaned forward, grinning. "Funny, you're sitting in an office financed by risk takers like me. If nobody took risks, you'd be stamping papers at a desk in the back." Her face flushed, but she stuck to the script and denied me. I walked out, got financing elsewhere a few months later, and hustled to get on the city's vendor list. Scraped together a small performance bond, barely cleared the insurance checks, and then landed my first government job, a municipal building repair. It wasn't massive, but it was steady money. I hired my first crew, a handful of guys who, like me, were used to being underestimated. We hustled. Long days, short nights, every dollar reinvested. I learned quick that running a business wasn't about swinging hammers. It was about juggling problems before they crushed you. Equipment broke down? Fix it yourself. Client complains? Show up at 6 o'clock a.m. and make it right. Crew member quits mid-project? Grab the shovel and cover the gap. Every week felt like a new test, but unlike my sisters, I didn't have a safety net. Nobody was bailing me out. And honestly, that pressure was addictive. Of course, the family still found ways to jab at me. At another family event, Erica the lawyer chimed in with, "You know, Lisa, legally speaking, you're setting yourself up for lawsuits. One accident and you're finished." I smirked. "Thanks for the free legal advice. Don't worry. When I can afford a lawyer, I'll be sure not to call you." They hated that I never bent, never apologized for chasing a path outside their bubble, and the more they tried to paint me as a failure, the more determined I got to shove success in their faces one day. By the end of that year, my company wasn't just surviving, it was breathing on its own. The bank account wasn't bleeding dry anymore. Jobs were coming in regularly. My truck wasn't full of overdue bills anymore. It was stacked with cleared checks and deposit slips that finally felt real. I remember standing on a half-finished office site late one evening, looking at the steel beams against the sunset. My hands were raw, my boots falling apart. But I felt something I'd never felt at home, Pride. Not borrowed pride, not bragging rights through someone else's title. Real pride. Something I built from nothing. And that was just the foundation. Once I had a few contracts under my belt, things started shifting. People who used to roll their eyes at me were now passing my number around. My crew went from 3 people in a truck to a dozen and an actual office space. It wasn't fancy, second floor above a laundromat, but it had a desk, a whiteboard, and enough room to make plans that didn't fit in a notebook anymore. I remember the first time I signed a contract worth 6 figures. My hands actually shook, not out of fear, but because I wanted to walk it back to my mom's dining room table, slap it down in front of her, and say, "Still think I'm a handyman?" But I didn't. I stayed quiet. Silence was becoming my favorite revenge. Of course, the family still tried to play gatekeepers. One project I landed involved renovating a cluster of commercial units. It was my biggest job yet, and I needed zoning approvals pushed through. Guess who popped up on the opposition letterhead? Erica. Not as the city, not as a regulator. She was counsel for a neighborhood association that suddenly cared about traffic, noise, and shadows. They filed objections, demanded hearings, and buried me in notices. It didn't kill the job, but it slowed everything. I hired a land use guy who eats this stuff for breakfast, tweaked a loading plan, and walked into the hearing with more data than they did. We beat it on the record and moved forward. When the ribbon cutting happened, I sent her firm an invite out of spite. She didn't show. Figured so. Then Isabel circled back into the picture. By now, my company was starting to show up in local papers. Small blurbs like, "Emerging contractor wins municipal project." Mom, of course, took credit at family dinners, telling everyone, "Well, I always told Lisa to push herself," which was hilarious considering she told me the exact opposite. Isabel called me one evening, voice dripping with fake warmth. "Heard you're doing well, little sister. Maybe you should move your accounts to my branch. I can get you great terms." I laughed. "You mean the same branch that denied me when I needed $5,000 to keep the lights on? Thanks, but I'll pass." She got defensive fast. "It's not personal, Lisa. Banks have policies." "Sure," I cut her off. "And now I've got policies too. One of them is never letting family touch my money." Click. End of call. The more they tried to drag me back under, the more determined I got to climb higher. And that's when the big one hit. Then came the big one. And honestly, it only happened because I played it smart. A developer was bidding out a downtown office tower, but I knew no way in hell they'd hand it to a woman whose biggest line item so far was a municipal repair job. So I pitched a joint venture with a larger GC. They had the bonding capacity and track record. I had the cost-saving design tweaks and local hustle. I fought tooth and nail to get my bonding line extended just to qualify. Mortgaged every asset I had, and sold them on my value engineering plan that cut almost $1 million off the steel package. That's what got me in the door. We didn't just win the job, we won a partnership. I wasn't just swinging hammers anymore. I had a seat at the big table with a sliver of equity riding on my performance. And when the tower started rising, it wasn't just another project. It was proof that all the grime and grit I'd eaten had built a real company. When I told my crew, they went silent for a second. Then one of them whistled low and said, "Boss, that's big time." Yeah, it was. And it was mine. We poured everything into that tower. Long days, long nights, weather delays, surprise inspections, you name it. I was on site almost 24/7, walking steel skeletons with my hard hat, dented from close calls, barking orders, solving problems before they became disasters. I'd fall asleep at the office with blueprints stuck to my face and wake up to the sound of concrete trucks. And I loved it every second. Halfway through construction, an opportunity came up that most people would have missed. The developers were strapped for cash, and they offered equity in the building instead of straight payment. Most contractors would have run from that deal. Me, I saw the long game. I took a chunk of ownership in that tower. Not just the sweat equity of building it, actual legal stake. Here's the thing. A year later, while tenants were lining up, guess who signed leases inside my building? Isabel's bank branch, Erica's law firm, both of them proudly announcing their prime downtown offices, not realizing they were moving into space that literally had my name in the ownership records. I didn't tell them. Why would I? Silence. Remember? Let them brag. Let them strut around their shiny offices, completely oblivious to the fact that every rent check they cut was putting money straight in my pocket. And Mom, she caught wind of the project too. Suddenly, she was calling again. Not to apologize, not to admit she was wrong, just to make sure the story didn't sound bad for her. She slipped into the conversation with that patronizing tone she always used when she wanted control. Well, at least you're finally doing something useful. Maybe you won't embarrass us forever, she said. I almost dropped the phone from laughing. Useful? Mom, I build towers. I don't need your permission slip to make them stand. She went quiet for a few seconds, then mumbled something about being proud in the same way someone mutters a curse they don't really mean. I could practically hear her choking on the words, like she couldn't decide if she was more annoyed that I'd made it or more scared that my success meant she couldn't control the narrative anymore. By the time that office tower opened, my company wasn't just some handyman side gig. We were on the map. Clients were calling, contracts were stacking, and the skyline literally had my fingerprints on it. And the sweetest part, my sisters had to walk through the revolving doors of a building their so-called failure sister owned a stake in every single day. I didn't brag. I didn't send reminders. I didn't post photos or shove articles in their faces. I just waited, smiling, knowing the day would come when the truth landed squarely in their laps. And when it did, there'd be no laughing it off, because that wasn't just another project. That tower was my middle finger in concrete and steel. Not long after the tower opened, Mom called again. Same sharp tone, same lack of warmth. No congratulations, no apology, just logistics. We're hosting my 65th birthday at the house. Be here, she said, like I was a stage prop. She needed to complete the family picture. I almost said no, but then I thought about all the times I sat quiet while they mocked me, about how they still thought I was the dirty outsider, and I realized if they wanted me there as a prop, fine, I'd show up, but I wasn't coming empty-handed. That's why I slipped the folder into my briefcase before I left. Inside, notarized documents proving my ownership stake in the downtown office tower, the same building my sisters strutted into every morning thinking they were queens of the city. My original plan had been to gift them a share as a peace offering, but after years of their contempt, I sure as hell wasn't going to. The house looked the same as always when I pulled up. Mom had gone overboard decorating the front yard. Balloons, flowers, banners. The inside was crowded. Relatives packed shoulder to shoulder. Suits, dresses, fake smiles. I caught a few glances as I walked in. Some people nodded politely. Others looked at me like they'd spotted a raccoon in the pantry. My sisters were huddled together, glasses in hand, whispering like teenagers. Sophia noticed me first and muttered something to the others. They all laughed. Same routine as always. I stayed quiet, found a corner by the window, and waited. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence makes people nervous. Dinner came and went. The food was fine. The conversation, the same recycled nonsense. Who got promoted, whose kid was starting private school, how perfect the daughters were. No one asked me about my company, and I didn't offer. I just sat back, chewing slowly, letting them enjoy their echo chamber. Then Mom stood up with a microphone in her hand. The room hushed immediately. She had that look, the one where she was about to perform. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she began. 65 years, and I'm so proud of what I've accomplished. Most of all, my daughters. The applause started right away. She went down the list. Sophia the doctor, Isabel the banker, Erica the lawyer. Each one got their round of praise. Glasses clinking, relatives smiling like trained seals. Then she paused. Her eyes flicked to me. And of course, she said, voice shifting. My other daughter, well, let's just say 3, made me proud. One made me wonder if she was even mine. The room exploded in laughter. Some people clapped. Others gave me that same pity smirk I'd seen my whole life. My sisters leaned back, grinning like they just scored the winning point in a game. But I didn't flinch. I didn't force a smile or look away. I just stood up, slow and steady, and the room started to quiet down. When I spoke, my voice cut clean through the chatter. You asked if I was even yours, Mom. Let me make it simple. I'm not what you expected. I didn't become a doctor, a banker, or a lawyer. But while you've been busy pretending I don't exist, I've been building something you can't ignore. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My sisters exchanged nervous glances. Mom folded her arms, bracing for another pathetic outburst, as she'd probably call it later. I bent down, grabbed my briefcase, and pulled out the folder. I held it up so everyone could see. Inside here are notarized documents proving I own a stake in the downtown office tower, the same building where Isabel's bank branch and Erica's law firm rent space. You know what my gift was going to be tonight, Mom? My success. The same success you swore I'd never have. I thought I'd share it with you, but after what you just said, consider it mine alone. The room went silent. You could hear forks hitting plates. A few relatives craned their necks to see the paperwork. My father may have left years ago, but at that moment, Mom looked like she'd been abandoned all over again, face frozen, pride shattered. Isabel's glass slipped from her hand and hit the table with a sharp crack. Erica opened her mouth but couldn't find words. Sophia just stared like she was watching a movie she didn't understand. Mom tried to recover. Her voice was lower, shaky. So what are you trying to prove, Lisa? I looked her dead in the eye. Nothing. Just closure. After tonight, we're done. I slid the folder back into my briefcase, slow and deliberate. No yelling, no dramatic exit, just quiet finality. Then I turned toward the room. You don't need to check the DNA, Mom. After today, consider that you no longer have a daughter. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some relatives lowered their heads. Others stared like they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. I walked out without looking back. My footsteps were the only sound in the room until the door clicked shut. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I felt like the only one in the family who had finally grown up. Walking out of that house was like dropping a boulder I'd been carrying for 30 years. The calls started the next morning. First, it was Mom. 3 missed calls before 9 o'clock a.m. Then a voicemail, where she tried to sound calm, like nothing happened. Lisa, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. You need to come over so we can talk about this like family. Like family. The same family that clapped when she said she wasn't sure I was hers. Then came the sisters. Isabel texted, You overreacted. It wasn't that deep. Erica wrote, Do you realize how awkward you made things for us? Our clients were there. Sophia stayed quiet for a while, then finally sent, We were wrong. You stood alone, and we mocked you. I'm sorry. Guess I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe them a response. Where were those words when I was eating ramen in a rented room, working 2 shifts just to pay tuition? Where was the concern when I was sleeping in my truck outside job sites? Too little, too late. And then Mom escalated. She called again, this time not pretending to be calm. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. You're the woman of the house now, Lisa. Your father's gone. You think you can just walk away from us? You need to start pitching in money like a real daughter would. You owe this family. I laughed out loud right into the phone. Woman of the house, you never let me be a daughter in the first place. You cut me out, mocked me, stole from me. Now you want me to fund your life because my sisters drained you dry? No thanks. Then I hung up. That line about me being the woman of the house stuck with me, though. Not because she was right, but because it summed up everything wrong with her logic. For years, I was the useless outsider. But the second I proved I could stand on my own, suddenly I was supposed to step up and cover her bills. Funny how respect only came attached to dollar signs. The visit started soon after. She showed up at my office one afternoon, walked straight past reception, and sat across from me in the meeting room. No smile, no warmth, just folded arms and that judgmental glare I grew up with. You're still my daughter, she said. No matter what you said the other night, families fight. But you can't just erase us. And you can't embarrass me in front of everyone like that. It's not how this works. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. Erase you? Mom, you erased me the day you emptied my college fund and told me I'd be a failure. You erased me every holiday when you paraded my sisters like trophies and left me out of the picture. Don't act like I'm the one cutting ties. I just finally said it out loud. Her face tightened, but I wasn't done. I leaned forward, voice steady. Maybe Dad left for a good reason. That hit like a hammer. Her jaw dropped, and for the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. No quick insult, no sarcastic retort, just silence. She clutched her purse strap like it was the only thing holding her together. I stood up, opened the door, and gestured toward it. You can leave now, and don't show up here again without an appointment. She walked out without another word. The silence after that was permanent. No more fake invitations. No more guilt trips. The sisters tried a few more half apologies, mixing sorry with excuses, but I kept my distance. I didn't need them. I didn't need her. I had my business, my crew, my buildings, my life. Still, late at night, when the office lights were off and the city buzzed below my window, my mind wandered back to Dad. The man who vanished when I was young, the one I'd blamed for everything. For years, I thought he was a coward who abandoned his family. But now I wasn't so sure. That thought stayed with me. It gnawed at me during quiet moments when the noise of contracts and deadlines faded away. For the first time, instead of hating him, I wondered if maybe I understood him. And I caught myself thinking, maybe I should try to find him. Maybe reaching out wouldn't just give me answers about him, but about myself too. I didn't do it. Not yet. But the idea was there, sitting in the back of my mind like an unopened door. And as I turned off the office lights and walked out into the night, I knew one thing. The story with my family wasn't over. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. And if you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. Because this isn't just about me proving my family wrong. It's about anyone who's ever been written off, underestimated, or treated like they didn't belong. For years, I was the ghost at the table, the afterthought in the family photo, the daughter who didn't count. But I learned something in the grind, in the sweat, in the silence. Respect doesn't come from begging. It comes from building. So if you've ever felt like the outsider, remember this. You don't need their applause. You don't need their stage. Build your own. And when the lights come on, let them see what they laughed at turned into something they can't ignore. That's what I did. And trust me, there's nothing sweeter than silence turning into shock.